think that's a pretty easy question to answer. I mean, if you look at the support that LTE has, I mean, obviously I represent the GSMA. We represent something like 86% of the world's market and operators, and we're being joined every day by new members from the old CDMA camp, people like Verizon and KDDI. By the time you put those people together, to be frank, there's almost nobody else. So a standard is on paper until it gets support, and it remains paper unless it gets support. We've got that kind of support, and there are some very public announcements that are all saying, effectively, all roads lead to LTE. There are some questions about how and when you do it, but we know everybody is moving to LTE. It's pretty obvious from the public announcements that we're going to see a very considered push through 2009 and see a lot more launches in 2010. I know of at least 12, 13 companies that have committed and will do that. But obviously it will take time. We have to be realistic. HSPA is just being rolled out and we'll have at least a 10-year shelf life. So we'll see, actually we're still seeing GSM taking off. We'll see a lot more in HSPA, and we'll see LTE gradually building up over the next couple of years. The really good news is there's a very strong push, even early on, to get it out there to market. It's interesting actually, because I've been hearing that question for 15 years, and there's still no simple answer. But there's one thing that for me is the killer driver, it's not the killer app, and that's demand. We've launched HSPA, and although people wouldn't admit it, we've all been amazed at the take-up. 230 networks live, 100 countries, 100 million users. The data demand has exploded. We've seen up to 10 times as much data consumption by end users. We've unleashed a monster. Consumers are now so used to it, they're so hungry for it, that we've got to, we run the Red Queen's race from Alice in Wonderland. I say that a lot. You've got to run as fast as you can to stay in the same place. You've got to serve the demand that you've stimulated, and that's the driver. What they use it for is up to them, but there's so much latent demand, we need to keep up with that. It's a very good question. Obviously, this is an unprecedented economic situation that we're in, and we have to take that seriously. It will have an impact. But we also have to be very careful not to overestimate that impact. There will be some slowdown potentially in rollouts in various places, but if you look at the major CapEx plans that have been announced by some of the very large operators, the investment is taking place. Look at China Mobile, look at Verizon, etc. I personally believe that there's a bigger risk to the rollout of LTE, and that's the lack of the right spectrum. So I think if governments and regulators don't release the right spectrum at the right time, that's potentially a much bigger roadblock than actually the economic downturn itself. It's very important for Europe because, Europe likes to pride itself in being a leading nation in mobile. If we don't get it right, quite frankly, we'll be giving that leadership up to other countries, and quite rightly so, they're doing better. If you look at the situation with the digital dividend, there are some good signs. I mean, the French were first to lead. In Switzerland, Sweden, now in the UK, we've got the right result, but we've got to keep the pressure on. It is unthinkable that in the homeland of GSM, we have a patchwork quilt of frequencies in some countries and not in other countries. We would jeopardize the very economy of scale that has made GSM such a world success. So we'll keep the pressure on, and so will all of our colleagues, because they have to see sense. They have to release that spectrum, and that will allow us to provide mobile broadband everywhere, including those rural areas that all the governments right now want to cover broadband with.